Last week saw the news that the highly anticipated next entry in the Fable series for Xbox has been delayed until next year. So how do developers feel about such delays and why do they happen? Before I begin, I have to say that I am not associated with Playground Games, and although I know a couple of people who work there, I am not privy to any information about what's happened. What I can say is that of the 12 games that I've released, 4 of them have experienced significant delays to the release dates. And I've often been in studios surrounded by other teams experiencing similar things. So why does it happen so often? Typically, it's nothing more surprising than things taking longer than expected. When we pitch projects, it's human nature to be optimistic about dates, especially when you're competing with other developers. We add contingency, of course, but it doesn't always last long enough. Game development is really exciting, and whilst we're making games, we're constantly coming up with new ideas and thinking of even better things to put in the game. And we tend to add more than we anticipated to the scope. It's so common we have a term for it, we call it feature creep. But we have to be really careful not to overpack the game with features and risk a delay. We can overestimate our ability and put in things that just don't fit. And we're often motivated by a feeling that this is the one chance we get to make this game. We want to do the best job that we can. Things happen along the way to cause delays, like we might struggle to hire specific people for the project, or we might lose team members mid-project. There may be engine upgrades that we want to take to improve the game, but that take longer to implement than anticipated. Or we might be using new tools that don't fully integrate into our pipelines, thus needing to spend more time to do the integration. More often the work does get done on time, but it's not good enough. Game development is completely iterative. For example, if your core game mechanics aren't as sweet as anything, then your game is no good. So you can implement it, do some user testing, iterate, user test, getting it better and better and better, and at some point a producer taps you on the shoulder and says, can we move to the next milestone? Now, quality is really hard to measure. We try to solve that problem with something called success criteria, but sometimes it just boils down to it doesn't yet feel good enough. Now, if something isn't feeling good enough and it's time to move on, the question of delay comes up. Quality is hard to measure, and we're optimists, so often we'll agree to move on to the next milestone, hoping that we'll find time to keep improving the quality under the radar. We also know that a conversation with management and executives about delays or scope cuts will be difficult. Now, early on in development, delays can happen frequently and nobody knows anything about it because we haven't yet announced the game. Now, years ago, games were announced very early and consequently, delays were happening all of the time. These days, we tend to wait longer to announce. But even when we do, we're still not finished. So we can't be completely certain that we're going to hit those dates. But we do need to announce the game so we can build excitement and get them onto wish lists so that publishers can track appeal. Now, games are complicated, multi-part machines, and it tends to be the weight of those parts and the interconnections between them that causes the team to need more time. That is, there's not a single problem, but the likelihood of getting everything done and bug-free reduces. And after all the effort of working on a game for months and years, nobody wants to release it half finished. Now, announcing a delay is no small thing, especially on a huge game like Fable. Whilst we live in a time where gamers are much more likely to accept the delay and say things like they want us to take more time and get it right than rush it out and be unfinished, nonetheless, it's going to cost millions in extra time. You can do the maths yourself. If a game costs 100 million to make and takes 4 years, and you delay for another year, it's going to be another 25 million. And that's not to mention the impact of the delay. Fable is going into 2026. Where will the platform be then? How does it affect the offering for this year? A game of this scale would be crucial in boosting Xbox hardware units this year. So delaying is a huge decision. So what happens behind the scenes? Well, firstly, it's typical for a team to detect something is amiss for a long time. And if I'm honest, at the beginning, there's a lot of wishful thinking. We think, maybe we'll catch up on the time. Maybe it'll be okay. As time passes and we continue to track poorly, so we look at scope. Now, no one likes cutting scope, but it's happened on pretty much every project I've ever worked on. And to be fair, when we begin a game, we always aim for more than we need, so that if we do cut, it doesn't become a subpar experience. Now, scope is dynamic. You can look at some things and measure the saving very easily. For example, if you have an artist making hats and you halve the number of hats that need to be made, you can measure that time quite simply that will be saved. But if you take something more complex and interdependent, like a mission with a unique game mechanic, it will touch on multiple departments: coders, designers, artists, UI, audio, and actually removing those things can be much more fruitful in terms of saving cost, because it's much harder to predict the cost of finishing those features. The question is simply, how can we still ship on time? So you look at the features that maybe you could remove and ask, well, could they be released after the game comes out as part of a patch or a DLC roadmap? That way you still deliver on time and retain the creative vision. Another option is to apply more resources. There are many things that are almost entirely effort driven. For example, something like translation, you can double the resources in half the time it takes. Many other things don't work like this. For example, adding more programmers doesn't always help because of the way that features are owned by particular programmers. If you've reduced your scope and looked at resources, you might still find it doesn't fit and need to take action. So publishing and the platform holder will need to know in good time, especially when it's a highly anticipated title. There'll be all sorts of things that need to be moved around, like promotion and press, before costs are incurred. So how do developers feel when their game is delayed? I can't speak for everyone, but over the years I've observed a mix of responses. Generally, we're glad that we won't be forced to release something that's not ready. There's little worse than spending months and years working on something that you know isn't yet finished and releasing it to a poor reception. It just feels horrible. Much better to take the time to ensure that the game is ready. That said, I've worked on projects where we've had delays and the game is still not ready. The worst of all worlds. Now the reality is that delaying means spending more money, and spending more money inevitably means more pressure on the team. In particular, the pressure to make safe choices and not add anything further is significant. Safe choices are unlikely to be innovative or ambitious ones. You can go from feeling like you're crafting a great experience to feeling like you're in school detention having done something wrong. Now another problem is around energy and pacing. Projects have a natural rhythm to them which becomes familiar after you've shipped a few games. For example, they go through cycles of convergence and divergence. At the start of a project, the team goes wide and explores lots of ideas before some kind of demo or review brings those ideas in. That is, we diverge and then we converge. Yeah, and after that review or that demo, we go back out again, exploring more ideas. And so the shape of the project can look like this, with like convergent and divergent cycles. Another analogy is a bouncing ball. That is, that the changes between the bounces get smaller and smaller as you get further towards the end of the project. So with this natural rhythm, so you have a sense that you're in the final stretch. But now there's a delay, you suddenly find yourself with another year of development. Had the team known from the start that they had this extra time, they would have planned more efficiently to maintain that rhythm. So this can be very tiring for the team, feeling like they're stuck in a cycle for months and months and months. Those natural project cycles provide energy, and the delay can feel like you're circling a runway. More than anything, developers want to make a great game that is loved by fans. And when the IP is as big and as beloved as Fable, hopefully the executives have provided not just the minimum amount of extension, but plenty of extra to ensure that quality. Now, as for the announcement, I think they did a brilliant job of announcing bad news. They announced in good time and tied it to a fantastic new trailer. This would have meant a lot to the developers too, that their fans are being respected and given the information in the best way possible. Personally, I can't wait to play the new Fable, but wait, we must.